Joining me now to discuss the situation in the Middle East, Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State. He's the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Welcome back, Congressman. Good to have you.
Thanks. Appreciate the chance.
So let's start with that aid. One of your colleagues over in the House, GOP Congressman Brian Mast, a veteran, says that this week the only way to make sure that this aid doesn't end up in the hands of terrorists is to just not send it. Senator Tom Cotton says this on X. He says about the aid to Gaza, at the very least, President Biden should have demanded Hamas release every hostage before giving them $1. So should we have used more leverage with this to get people back? And how worried are you about it falling into the wrong hands?
Look, there's no question that there are risks in sending the aid in, risks that Hamas will take advantage of it. But I would ask, anyone who's critical of this, should it really be our plan to starve 2 million Palestinians in Gaza? I think there's considerable risk in doing that as well. Look, Israel has to win the broader fight against Hamas. It is a military campaign. Anyone who says there's no military solution to this, I think the military is a huge part of it. But you also have to be able to win over the broader public and make sure the war doesn't spread. And if you don't send humanitarian aid into the Palestinians, what is going to happen to the 2 million civilians in Gaza? They're going to die is what's going to happen. So getting humanitarian assistance in so that this doesn't turn into collective punishment and something that's going to inflame the world is a crucial part of Israel being able to actually defeat Hamas. And I wish more people understood that.
So as all of this is playing out, the White House is sending over $106 billion supplemental request, lumping a lot of these things together: Ukraine, Israel, the border, Taiwan. There were a number of senators who put together a letter to leadership this week saying they don't think those should be tied together, especially on top of the $113 billion that Congress has already allocated for Ukraine. They say this: these are two separate conflicts. It is wrong to leverage supportive aid to Israel in an attempt to get additional aid for Ukraine across the finish line. It would be irresponsible, and we should not risk a government shutdown by bundling these priorities together. Would you be for separating these, having the administration make the separate arguments, passing them separately, if it looks like aid to Israel will be slowed down potentially by keeping them together?
Yeah, well, I think it's three separate points I want to make here. First of all, we have supplemental spending packages at the end of most years, and there's always more than one issue. Sometimes disaster relief is linked with the border. Sometimes there's been a disaster overseas. And frequently those things are lumped together depending how legislatively it plays out, first of all. Second of all, the Senate can handle it however they want to handle it, and so can the House. And if there's a path forward with a separate package, that's fine. We can have that discussion. Third, certainly the issues are separate, but they are also connected in the way that President Biden said and the way in which Senator McConnell just agreed. Look, Russia, China, Iran, and I would throw in North Korea and terrorist groups like Hamas have a very clear mission. And that mission is to destroy the existing rules-based international order and to weaken the U.S. and our allies. And they are working together. Iran is sending weapons to Russia. They're part of that fight. Russia is helping Iran. So it's wrong to say that these things are not connected. Yes, they have separate aspects to them. And if the Senate wants to handle them separately, that's fine. But I don't think we should kid ourselves about how closely connected Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, and groups like Hamas are.
Well, the supplemental also has this breakout money for the border, and that's a growing concern about whether those bad actors you all named may use our porous border to come here and carry out attacks within the U.S. One analysis of the supplemental says there's 4 times as much money for Ukraine and its border as there is for our border. Here are some recent numbers. We just got the latest monthly encounter numbers on our southern border. Nearly 270,000. That is a record high for the fiscal year. We're more than 2.4 million. That's also the highest number ever. And for the last 3 years, that record has been broken under the Biden administration. This fiscal year also marks the highest number of arrests at the southern border for people who are connected to a terror watch list. So with all the things you've laid out and these numbers here, how worried are you about a bad actor using our border? The fact that it's completely, by many assessments on both sides of the aisle, out of control to harm us here in the U.S.
Well, there's no question we have a crisis on the border. There's no doubt about that. And yes, I think we need to be focused on protecting that. And terrorism is certainly one risk. And the larger risk is the humanitarian crisis and the challenge of having so many people fleeing Latin America and into the U.S. But look, the real problem is the migration problem. To some degree, it's the same problem that Europe's having. We have so many crises all over the world. Certainly, there have been a number of Ukrainian refugees. Senator McConnell mentioned what Europe is having to do to accommodate the millions of people pouring out of Ukraine. We're having to accommodate, millions of people pouring out of Venezuela. I mean, the source of this conflict is all of the people fleeing violence, fleeing poverty in Latin America. So a comprehensive approach is definitely needed. So yes, without question, the border is part of this equation.
Well, and you have people showing up at the border and saying, I'm coming here because my understanding is that I can stay here, I can come across, and I can go to cities like Chicago, New York, other places that now say that they're absolutely overwhelmed and can't take any more people.
Yeah, but again, understand the problem here. The problem is because these people can't stay in the countries that they're from. And that instability is driving a migration process across the globe. Part of it is we got to look at, what can we do to increase stability? And I'll go ahead and say something controversial here for Fox. We've placed massive sanctions on Venezuela. And let me be clear. The Venezuelan economy was in the toilet long before we did that because of Chavez and because of Maduro. But I think we got to ask ourselves, is an aggressive posture of sanctions that is helping at least to drive millions of people out of Venezuela, is that really in the best interests of U.S. security? I think we have to re-examine policies like that as well.
But what about the issue that we're having people show up at the border who are also from China, from Iran? I mean, that's not somebody that you don't walk to the southern border from places like that.
Right. Well, I mean, these are people who are migrating to Latin America and then working their way up from there. Yeah, look, I mean, the global instability is impacting a lot of countries in a lot of places. So, yes, I think that has to be part of what we're looking at also.
Okay, I want to ask about these proxy attacks we've been talking about in the Middle East. There are some talking very tough. I mean, Senator Lindsey Graham, he's a vet. He's very hawkish. He said we have to send a warning to Iran that if they ramp up these attacks, if they start killing hostages, any number of things, that we may actually strike on Iranian soil, taking out oil infrastructure, their industry, that kind of thing. Is there any scenario for you in which you see U.S. military assets being used, even from the skies, with respect to Iran?
Well, up front, there's a couple of pieces to this. One, we have to have a strong deterrent presence. And President Biden responded quickly to move forces to the region and to make sure that, first of all, our assets in Syria and Iraq in particular are protected, and that we have that show of force that we're in a position to deter Iran. That is crucial. But the second piece of this that's really important that a number of people have emphasized, it is not good for Israel, it's not good for U.S., and it's not good for the world if this conflict spreads. We've got Hezbollah in Lebanon, we've got Shia militias in Syria and elsewhere, we've got Iran, we've got the instability on the West Bank. If this spreads, Israel is in a heck of a lot of trouble. So no, I wouldn't be anxious about striking into Iran and starting a war with Iran as we're going forward. I mean, that would place Israel in an incredibly perilous situation and would also risk further expansion of the war in a way that is harmful to the U.S. and to the world at large.
Well, Congressman, as we've talked about before, you've been to many of these places and been there on the ground. You've got firsthand experience. So thank you for coming to share your viewpoint with us. Always good to see you.
Thanks, Shannon. Appreciate the chance.